Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio on TuneIn, joins us. Paul Catalina, Craig, and David Smoke. Ari, hey, man, how you doing? Like it? Good to see you.
Yeah, what's going on, guys? Hopefully the weather's not too shabby down south in Waco, because it's pretty bad here.
Is it really? It's very, very, very steamy, muggy.
Yeah.
But did the Big 12 butcher itself over the weekend?
I mean, sure. After week 10, yes, absolutely. That's the takeaway. I think, though, if you watch what happened around the country, we're seeing a lot of that. I mean, at this point in time, it's hard to believe, but there's only 3 SEC teams in the top 10. And we know how hard the AP top 25 likes to work towards getting SEC teams in the top 10, but they continue to kind of eat themselves in a sense. Clemson lost again this weekend. Are they out of the playoff picture now? Pitt loses. So now SMU firmly in kind of the driver's seat from an ACC perspective. So, I mean, yeah, I think this was the week leading up to this weekend where we saw really some momentum building from multiple bid Big 12. And yeah, I mean, the Kansas State loss to Houston is devastating. I think the Texas Tech victory over Iowa State is probably less devastating for that. But look, with the one thing we know is buckle up, because at this point, chalk hasn't gone that way. And even the teams that you expect to continue to win, I mean, A&M falls, they drop out of the top 10. So, you only have 3 SEC teams in the top 10, which again, go back in years past, look after week 10, how many SEC teams are in the top 10 usually. And it's not like the Big 10 is as good as it may seem with 4 of the top 10 teams. So, I mean, you've got 4 Big 10, 3 SEC, 1 ACC, 1 Big 12, 1 independent. So I think that says a lot about where everybody is at this point in time in terms of the playoff picture.
Ari, Iowa State takes that loss. Kansas State takes a loss. Kansas State now has to win, and has to win Farmageddon to make sure that they're in the game. Has your mind changed about Iowa State at all after stumbling against a Texas Tech team that was stumbling themselves going into that game?
Maybe not necessarily about Iowa State, Paul, but it's sort of weird, the trend that we've seen with Big 12 teams not being able to come up with stops in those final possessions. And I mean, we've seen it in multiple games this year. I mean, my God, my Jayhawks have done it seemingly every week. But I mean, when you get Texas Tech with the football, Iowa State with the lead, in a minute or whatever was left, you're thinking Iowa State's going to get the stop here. Because we've seen John Haycock defenses do a lot less. So I think what I'm surprised about is just the amount of Big 12 defenses, rather Big 12 offenses that are besting Big 12 defenses down the stretch. When you need to get that stop on demand, it feels like teams are not getting them. And so, yeah, I mean, it's Texas Tech. We've seen Baylor be on both sides of it. So, yeah, it's a bizarre, for me, kind of turn of events to where we've seen really good defenses in this conference. And I think heading into the season, I expected the Big 12 defenses to be really, really good. And yet, I think it's 22 of the 44 Big 12 games. So literally half of the Big 12 games have been decided by a touchdown or less. And then 12 of those 22 were decided in the final possession. And so I think a lot of that has to do with Big 12 defenses at this point in time. They're just not getting the stops that we've expected them to get. And even an Iowa State defense. Now, look, they've been decimated by injuries along their linebacking core. They're starting 2 true freshmen and a walk-on who's a redshirt freshman, and Rylan Barnes, who, by the way, may be their best defensive player right now. So they're going to start to, I think, get some of their linebackers back and healthy. Maybe that'll make a difference. But we've just kind of come to see this Iowa State defense. It hasn't mattered what they haven't had, and they've been able to hold up. But yet in this game, they didn't, especially in that final possession.
Kind of a 2-part thing here on Texas Tech, Ari. Let's talk about, I'd like your opinions on the helmet communications issue from last week that Texas Tech made public, and is standing by and is obviously ticked off about. You see the wife of the athletic director sounding off and I mean, so on and so forth. But for them, in the midst of that, to not turn around and then lose to Iowa State, but to go get a win was just so massive for that reason, for just their season trajectory and getting bowl eligible, getting a big win. So kind of on the one hand, just the on the field, how big was that for Texas Tech? And then the off the field, what did you make of that storyline and their issues last week?
Yeah, it's funny, right? We had the hand signals forever. And finally, we got rid of those because, well, I mean, we've got the technology in order to go far beyond the hand signals and the signs on the sideline and everything else. And It took literally not even a full season before we already had issues with this new helmet communication, which was the replacement for the system that was in place forever that seemed to never fail with the exception of last year, right? So it's one of those things where, no matter what the technology is, teams, programs are going to look to exploit it. Now, with that being said, it doesn't seem like that's what happened here. It seems like, the unencrypted audio that was being sent may have been potentially compromised if there were others involved that knew what they were doing and could have done it. Now, I know that Texas Tech sort of did their own independent investigation and found, they could easily, I guess, hack into the system or whatever. But, I think it's been well documented, like being able to decipher the signals, hearing, again, just one aspect of the conversation, because you're not going to have a full aspect of all of the what's being said down the line, then to decipher what's being said, and then to project it onto the field to get it to the right people. It sounds like you're just better off playing defense straight up against that team, and figuring out what they're trying to do to you, as opposed to, trying to figure out how to steal signs. So yeah, it definitely felt like sour grapes for a team that had lost 2 straight. And, did it translate on the field? What a bizarre game. Iowa State really dominated that game offensively. When you look at the yards, you look at what they were able to do. The biggest difference was the penalties for Iowa State and then the turnovers. Iowa State normally feasts on teams that turn the football over. Baron Morton had 2 interceptions. He had a third that was called back for a penalty. Again, it was probably a closely contested game, and I think some of those penalties were bad calls, but it went both ways the entire football game. And Iowa State just didn't play well enough in order to overcome them. And I think similarly, like Kansas State, like they just couldn't come up with enough stops and do enough on offense in the second half to make it. So, look, credit Texas Tech's defense for what they did in the second half against Rocco Becht, who's been one of the best, most underrated quarterbacks. And then, of course, credit Taj Brooks. You guys mentioned you're having him on later. I mean, what a dynamic player. It's funny. We talked earlier about, like, does this put him out of the playoff picture? And it's like, it's not like these teams are losing to bad teams. I mean, Taj Brooks is one of the best running backs and has been in the country. So like the fact that I think he had 4 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown on that final drive. So like that just shows you the effectiveness of some of these other teams. I mean, Colorado, it's a really good team with a ton of talent. Texas Tech's a team that's been there. So Baylor playing significantly better. So, this is sort of how we thought the conference would shake out. We thought maybe be a little bit more top heavy. And be a little bit better at the top, but it's not at least playing out like that. And, find me another team in another conference like a Houston that could go and knock off a Kansas State. I mean, I don't think a Mississippi State and the SEC or, a Michigan State or a, Northwestern in the Big Ten can jump up and bite one of the top teams of the Big Ten or the SEC. So I think that speaks to just the variety, the depth of this conference. But yeah, in terms of your question overall, I guess a little disappointed to see Texas Tech still kind of respond despite the Big Ten investigating, saying that nothing was compromised. And then still, I mean, all they basically said was it's not as throwaway of it's not as much of a throwaway as we're expecting it to be. Basically, what Texas Tech is saying is we're not accusing anybody of doing anything, but we were able to hack into our own system. So it's like, okay, I mean, maybe the system was somewhat compromised, but again, like, the idea that you can then decipher what's being said and then relay that onto the field in real time seems kind of absurd at best.
Colorado sits back, relaxes, and enjoys a weekend, and everything in front of them, the door opens for them. They have to win, but can you believe this? I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do. I think it's great. They kind of stopped the talk. There's still kind of some glitz and glamour. They just started playing football and winning games. And here they are. It's right there in front of them.
Yeah. And look, this is their final hurdle when you look at the rest of their 4 games they've got, because it's Utah the following week, then at Kansas, and then Oklahoma State to close out the season. And I have no sense of Oklahoma State being able to win a conference game. They are as bad as I've ever seen. And I mean, they went 1-7 in Mike Gundy's first year. They went 3-6 as one of their worst conference record in the Gundy era. But beyond that, they've never had more than 6 or more losses in the Big 12. And they're 0-6 here with, I mean, nothing resembling a team that looks like they can put together a win in these final 3 games of the season for them. So, I mean, we're in uncharted water for Oklahoma State. So, yeah, I mean, the big game for them is this week against Texas Tech in Lubbock. And Texas Tech is playing good football. If they're feeling really good about themselves after having those 2 straight losses and then handing Iowa State their first loss of the season. So we'll see what happens this week. But I mean, look, there's a long history here between Deion and Joey McGuire. Joey actually coached Deion's oldest son in high school. And obviously with Joey's familiarity with, the Dallas landscape, with Deion, being in the Dallas area, there's very much a familiarity between these two coaches. So I think that's really interesting. And yeah, Smokey, to your point, like, this is great for the Big 12. There's not a ton of drama. There's not a ton of noise around Colorado. They're just quietly doing this. And look, suddenly now you've got some Heisman talk around Travis Hunter where, he or Ginty or maybe even Cameron Scadaboo, who eclipsed 1,000 yards in 8 games this past week, are all part of that discussion. So, all good stuff for the Big 12. Now, look, they were the big winner, and I think the talking point coming out of this week is how much Colorado was the big winner. But remember, like, weird things happen. So even as I look at their schedule and say, like, Texas Tech's the one slip-up opportunity they have, like, who knows what's going to happen with Utah? Who knows what happens at Kansas? Like, this is what happens at the end of the year. Bad teams can bite good teams, especially teams that know they need to win to continue playing and to get to a conference championship game. So, they've got to make sure that they're not overlooking anybody in the rest of their schedule. Obviously, Texas Tech with this game coming up this weekend, that'll be a big one. If they win that one, it comes down to their ability to get prepared to play and not overlook any opponents moving forward, because that's going to be the biggest, hurdle for them to finish the season the right way.
All right, let's play a quick game of off-season staff changes. You tell me yes or no if it'll happen for these teams. We'll start with Oklahoma State, who you just mentioned. Will they have large off-season staff changes?
Can't imagine they go winless in conference or 1 win in conference and the worst year for Mike Gundy since his first season 20 years ago and not have some change. They've been calling for Casey Dunn's head for many, many years, but he's been there for many, many years. So I'd find it hard to believe that Dunn would be replaced despite all of the calls for him to be replaced. Although I will say Gundy's called him out a ton this year, so maybe that says something. I don't think there's any chance Brian Nardo can survive this. He went and got Nardo as one of his specialty hires from a small school. And I mean, they've just been the worst defense in the Big 12 the last 2 years. The difference, guys, like, this is the same team as last year. The difference was they had the Doak Walker Award winner running the football for them, which opened up a lot of opportunities for Alan Bowman. And then remember, they had Colin Oliver and Nick Martin on their defense. So they gave up a ton of yards. But when you've got Colin Oliver who can engineer some splash plays on defense and turn some teams over, like, suddenly it's okay to be giving up a chunk yardage. So without Colin Oliver healthy, without the Doak Walker Award winner from last year doing what he did last year, this is what we're seeing. This is the exact same team from last year, except for the 2 guys on defense that are injured that made up for the issues they had on defense. So I see no way that Nardo's back. But and with Dunn, it feels like it's a long time coming, but we've also seen Gundy's kept down to Dunn for a long time here.
All right, Arizona, Kansas, and Utah.
Here's what I'll say about Arizona. It's sort of inexcusable that their offense is this bad. And so I could 100% see Brent Brennan being one and done, which sounds shocking, but I think they're very unhappy in Tucson. It doesn't help that their rivals, across the way in Tempe are having such a great season. But yeah, I mean, look, the issues that they had with Dino Babers as the offensive coordinator, then he's replaced. That was sort of a weird dynamic in your first year. So yeah, but again, you've got multiple offensive linemen. You've got multiple NFL offensive linemen along your offensive front. You've got, T-Mac, one of the best receivers in college football, and a quarterback that had come off a fantastic season. Like, there's no excuse for this offense to be this dreadful. It's really unbelievable how bad their offense is. And then what were the other ones you gave me?
Utah and Kansas.
Utah's interesting because, Whittingham has named his coach and replacement. So, is this the perfect opportunity for him to step away, or is it the worst time to step away because you're handing the keys over when things look really, really dire? You can make the case for both of them. Whittingham said years ago that he wouldn't coach past 65. He's going to be 65 in next year in this offseason. He's going to turn 65. So, I would have said when the season started, there's no way that this will be Whittingham's final season, but I could start to see it, especially again with this being the second time they've named Morgan Scalley their coach in waiting. As for Kansas, I mean, I'd be shocked to see any changes there. Maybe Jeff Grimes would be the big one. I could definitely see that one, but I don't see a change at coach. I don't see a change at defensive coordinator. And look, maybe it's the perfect time to be replacing Jeff Grimes because you're going to be breaking in kind of an entirely new offense next year because they've had so much carryover at quarterback, at wide receiver, even at offensive line the last few years. So I could definitely see Grimes being let go.
I know they're not in contention for the top of the league now, but how about that Baylor TCU finish and just the game itself, the back and forth? Ari, obviously a huge win for Dave Aranda and a pretty brutal loss for Sonny Dykes. But your thoughts on that latest chapter in the rivalry on Saturday night?
Yeah, and I really enjoyed listening to your post-game audio as well, Craig. I caught that and the Baylor, or the Second 365 podcast network.
Thanks, man.
And so I enjoyed what you were talking about there.
Appreciate
And I think, like, for me, it's the call by Aranda to go for it on fourth down there.
No kidding. Yeah.
I mean, that could really backfire in a huge way. And now all of a sudden, Aranda is probably out of a job. I mean, let's just play that out. If they don't get that, now TCU's in position to hit a few plays, and now they're kicking a game-winning field goal potentially. So I think going for it, the pass by Sawyer Robertson. And not only that, but I think the Bryson Washington run after that is very underrated because, like, for me, this game came down to two things. It's that fourth down play by Sawyer and Trigg, and then the running by Bryson Washington. And this is 2 straight weeks now. We've seen, Dawson Pendergrass explode last week, and now it's Bryson Washington this week. And it's funny because coming into the year, we all thought, like last year, Richard Reese would be the guy. And yet, once again, it's been other guys that have been the guys for this rushing attack. The offensive line has dramatically improved over the course of the season. And yeah, I mean, it's a big deal for Baylor to win 3 straight games. It's a big deal for Baylor to win this game, Craig, like you were talking about on the postgame show. So huge win for Dave Aranda, huge win for this program. And, you're starting to see this defense play more consistently. I think sort of up and down week after week with Aranda taking over, it's playing way more consistently. And then that fourth down call, I mean, the cojones on Aranda to make that call, and then for Robertson to complete the pass. That in many ways, if this, whatever the season ends up at, and look, Baylor now in really good position to potentially win out here. I know we talked about, expectations, and you don't want to look too far down the road at these games because upsets happen this time of year. But, if Baylor wins out here, we're going to look at that call in this game and the play by Robertson, that really saved this season and saved Aranda's job at Baylor.
Yeah, because if they don't make it, TCU throws a couple of 12-yard outs and they kick the field goal like they did a couple of years ago. Ari, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Great to have you on Mondays to kind of look back and also look ahead to the weekend.
You guys are the best. Take care. And I get late night tonight with Gonzaga and Baylor at 10:30 Central.
God, I might go to sleep.
There's no way. Like Ari, I'm not going to pretend like I can stay up.
Yeah,
and watch
you
that
are.
game.
We're going to go to bed early.
I'm not
going to set the alarm.
Paul's going to be here for a live post game after.
Yeah, no, I'd love to
One of the
watch
best
it.
games. It's one of the best games of the week. Come on,
I know.
We gotta get it.
Don't put it at 10. Gosh damn 30.
I'll tell you this.
That's what I'll say.
If Kansas was playing Gonzaga at 10:30, you would be forced to stay up.
Yeah, I would be.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Appreciate
You
it,
guys.
Ari. By the way, on what he said about Craig, your rapid reactions, Bobby B., Craig's Rapid Reaction podcast, it's always the first go-to during the postgame, always excellent. Thank you very much for that. And then he writes a good, the bad, and the ugly the following day like he did in the forums.